everybody waking up one day and being like, oh, Miranda's actually an untalented piece of shit, and we didn't realize it. Now no one has to love her. Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf. This is a bilingual podcast, so if you subscribe to us, you'll be getting episodes in English with me, as well as in Spanish with Reinaldo and Reinaldo. Together we speak to people from around the globe about their practice and passions in the field of print media and multiples. Hello, Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, currently offering possibly the best thing to happen to relief printmaking, their Woodzilla presses. Beautifully made in the Netherlands, these uniquely engineered presses perfectly combine superior craftsmanship and performance at a price that makes them accessible whether you're a seasoned printmaking pro or new to the craft. Available across 5 sizes, each Woodzilla press is precisely manufactured from heavy-duty steel and designed to apply uniform pressure without undue work or stress for the artist, while still guaranteeing a beautifully printed result at every reveal. Check out these beauties through the link in the show notes. This episode is also brought to you by Legion Paper. Legion is a fine art paper company representing the best papers in the world. They either stock it, source it, or make it. With brands like Stonehenge, Somerset, Coventry, Reeves, Arches, and more, Legion is the best paper resource for every artist and printmaker's needs. Learn more about the variety of paper Legion stocks at www.legionpaper.com. Welcome to a very special episode of Hello Print Friend. In celebration of our 200th release on the English language channel, my co-host Reinaldo and I sat down for a chat about the past, present, and future of our podcast, how I got into this business in the first place, my worst fears and fondest dreams. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to get meta with Reinaldo and Miranda.
Hello, Miranda Metcalf. How are you doing?
Hello, Reinaldo. This is so natural. Yeah.
Yeah, right? It's just kind of weird to be on this side too, like looking at the numbers and stuff.
Totally. Yeah, you're getting the interviewee's perspective of the Zencaster studio. So,
That's
yeah.
great. How are you doing today? How's it going in Santa Fe?
It's going really well. I'm coming up on the last 2 weeks of Santa Fe. So it's a little bittersweet. It's a beautiful place to live, and we've met some really great people here, but it's too fucking expensive. I'm moving on.
Oh my God, that's so great. I mean, it's just amazing to see like your journey. I mean, you have been in so many different countries, moving around to so many different cultures. But one thing that continues to be constant is that connection to printmaking.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
just always makes me wonder, like, how do you fall in love with this media? You know, you're going to be moving across the country now to a different setting,
Yeah.
and that constant is going to still be there. So I just really wondering, like, how do you fall in love with this process?
Yeah. Like the beginning of our love story with
Yeah.
printmaking. Okay. Printmaking and I. So I did my undergrad in philosophy and I focused on philosophy of art. And I graduated with my bachelor's in philosophy in 2008, otherwise known as the most recent financial crisis, unless you count this financial crisis that we're currently in. And it was really it wasn't easy to get a job. I was working at a Barnes and Noble, and I really wanted to work in the books. And then they learned I could talk to people, and they made me do the cafe, the Starbucks inside the Barnes and Noble, which is really terrible because then you're working for Barnes and Noble, but you have to make coffee for people, and you don't get any of the benefits that you get as a Starbucks employee.
Jeez.
And people were always complaining about the quality of the coffee, which was really funny too, because you're like, you're at a Starbucks, in a Barnes and Noble, in a strip mall. Like, this seems like a you problem. But so I really knew I wanted to go back to graduate school. And it was something that I'd thought of before, but I just sort of fallen into philosophy because I just loved all the classes. I didn't really think about my future or what I was going to do with it. And so knowing that I'd loved studying the art, I decided to be an art historian and knew that that came with you can work at a museum, you can work at an auction house, you can work at a gallery, you can be a researcher. It actually had jobby jobs on the other side of it. And I knew nothing about art history, though. I think I had taken just a handful of art history classes. So I wrote a really, looking back, I think sort of unhinged application for graduate school because I didn't know the language of art history. And so I applied a bunch of places, and I was lucky enough that I got in at the University of Arizona working with Dr. Pia Cuneo, and I knew I wanted to study animals and art. And that was what my whole application had been about, not really understanding that that's not how you actually apply for an art history degree. You don't say, I like animals, I like art, I'm going to make them kiss. Like, that's not how it works. You need to say, I'm interested in 16th century Dutch, or I want to write about Christo's running fence. You talk more about time period or artists or styles. But luckily, Pia saw something in my application that she liked, and she invited me to come study with her. And she was an expert in 16th century horses and their imagery, but also prints. And so I showed up in graduate school really not knowing anything about printmaking. I was really in the theory and the philosophy, not in the making, not in the technical side of things in any way. And so I started taking these courses from her, reading the works that she assigned, being in her graduate seminars, which were very print focused. And that's really when, as from a historical point of view, that world opened up to me. And I saw that the capacity for the multiple, how it had fundamentally changed the way people communicate, how Martin Luther translates the Bible into the common tongue. It nearly brings down the institution of the Catholic Church, which had been untouchable for over a millennia. You get standardization of medical textbooks. You get porn for the first time. Because think about it, you could pass around a naughty drawing, or maybe if you were really rich and eccentric, you could commission an oil of people humping. But like, you can get erotic imagery that is small, you can fold up. As my wonderful professor Pia Cuneo once iconically said, you can hold it in one hand. and so you get this whole world that's these seeds of our contemporary life, the seeds of what we now see in the internet age, of information being spread around quickly, of propaganda being spread quickly, of erotic imagery being spread quickly, of people being able to share ideas and sometimes revolutionary ideas just in an unprecedented way. And so that history and that connection to our human story and our human experience was really how I fell in love with that medium, and wrote a thesis on Peter Bruegel's Seven Deadly Sins. And from there, really just was really fortunate that I was in a right place, right time, where I got hired as the director of contemporary printmaking at Davidson Galleries, and actually got to continue in printmaking in a professional capacity as a non-printmaker, that's a very small amount of jobs in the world that you can do that with. And then just was just to hook it to my vein. I want it straight, like, from there. Yeah.
What is fascinating about that is you say that you didn't know how to apply, but
Mhm.
you basically did it. Now you have a podcast. You created this thing. We're celebrating 200 episodes.
Yeah.
That's what we're recording right now. do you had any experience with this media, with radio, speaking to people, like
Mm.
somehow trying to make those connections with makers in order to bring those stories out and get those nuggets of knowledge before starting this thing? And how did you like got into like creating
Yeah,
this
it's
podcast?
I feel like it's kind of twofold. One is, as my husband will tell you, I have the capacity to talk to anyone and he loves it. He's like, I get in an Uber, I don't got to do shit. My wife's going to be leaned forward in her seat getting the guy's life story. And so I've always had the gift of gab, but also I think a really genuine interest in other people that is just innate. I think that's not something you can necessarily fake, but I find people fascinating. What's that 70s song that I always connect with? It's like I could be in love with anyone. I think people are the greatest. Anyway, it's in like Wes Anderson movies. And I always listen to that. And I'm like, yeah, that's me. Like I have always just been like, yes, another human. Maybe I just have always felt like an alien myself and like I don't know how to do things. And so I'm really hoping that they can tell me. I'm like, yes, this Albanian Uber driver, like he has the secret. I'm gonna just like drill him for it. But so there was that. And then the other side of it is that I always loved radio. I grew up on NPR. I grew up on This American Life and Radio Lab and these really sort of proto podcast seeds that were in the world. And it continues to this day. I actually was in Marfa, Texas this last weekend, and I saw the Marfa public radio station. And I was there on a Saturday and I made Tim pull over. And I went to the door and it was locked. And I was literally like trying to break in. I was like rattling the handle. This guy comes out and he's like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "I love public radio."
What?
And it turned he was the station manager and he was super nice and he let me in and he showed me all the stuff and I bought a Marfa public radio mug. But I just have always had this passion for the intimacy of storytelling in an audio format. And I think that comes from the aforementioned my interest in other people. And then also my real want for human connection. That's something that is really deep within me that I want to feel connected to other people. And I think there's something specific about audio formats where you're not seeing someone, you're not distracted by what they look like. Have they brushed their hair that day? You're just hearing their voice. And a lot of times it's listened to through headphones. So it feels really present and like you're connecting with someone very genuinely. And I think the format itself also leads to more vulnerability on the account of the person being interviewed because they know they're not going to be seen. And it's part of the reason why I've never really wanted to transition our podcast into a YouTube podcast because those are great. Like a lot of people do them, but I think there's a safety in knowing that you don't have to worry about how you're looking right now. It frees up a lot of processing power in the brain to be more insightful and vulnerable. And I love this idea of expanding into documentary shorts. You've done that incredible series where you traveled around the country and talked to people. That's wonderful. And I'm so grateful that that's a part of our media empire. But I think that the podcast should stay just that intimacy, and then we can expand in these other ways of visual storytelling. But they're really apples and oranges to me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense too. And also, there is a possibility for editing,
Hmm.
right? So, I mean, that gives another opportunity to people to really express what they want, have also a chance to like reinterpret maybe something that they wanted to say. So it can be as clear as their vision is, and they can be as comfortable as they can. So
Yeah.
that's,
No, it's such a good point because that's the number one thing I get asked. And I imagine you do too when we're doing the pre podcast interview work. people come with these big eyes and they say, is it going to be edited?
Yeah,
Do not worry. We're going
exactly.
to make you look good. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about editors. We should do a shout out to
Yeah.
Timothy Pauschek.
Tim really is the unsung hero, the little man behind the curtain. Maybe I should edit that out. That doesn't sound too doesn't sound too complimentary, but in the sense that he's Mr. Wizard, in that I came with really wanting to do this, but I didn't know any of the sound engineering stuff. I didn't really know about editing. And so he found all the technology that makes the podcast go that really both of us still use to this day. So there truly would not be a Hello Print Friend without Tim.
Wow, that's amazing. So you had this idea, you wanted to make this connection with people. You wanted to do it kind of like in a radio formatting. But I mean, like it was the support of Tim that somehow make you crafted into what it is right now, or what it was in that moment called Pine Copper Lime.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Absolutely. It was him, not only technical support, but also I'm not a printmaker. That's the open secret of Hello Print Friend. And so he was able to say, this is what I would want to hear. And he was able to say, this is who I want to hear from, and really gave that perspective that I think immensely increased the quality, particularly in the early days before I'd found any footing of what the podcast is, who we're talking to, what kind of questions are we asking. He was really pivotal in forming all of that structure that now we stand on.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's amazing. So this was back in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And you started, where were you located in that time?
I was in Sydney, Australia.
You were in Sydney, Australia,
Uh-huh.
and this, I mean, I'm assuming that you were doing that at your house?
Yeah. So at the time, we had just landed recently. So we were staying with Tim's graduate advisor and his family. They were really generous and they opened up their house. They said, "Hey, you're going to land here. Just stay with us until you sort of find your footing," because it's a big move. And so I think the very first episodes I recorded in the basement of this beautiful house that they have out in Hornsby Heights, which is a very northern suburban city in Sydney. And I had just a little ears and mic set up for the headphones that it was like pre earpods even, I think. So it was that really original Apple technology thing. What were those called? Just headphones, I guess. I don't
Yeah.
know. Just headphones with a mic. And I was terrified, and I only recorded episodes that were like 20 minutes long because I thought no one would want to hear printmakers talk for longer than that.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of anything against printmakers, but just I think because I just didn't have that confidence. I was like, well, whatever I make is going to be totally shit, so it should be short.
But you did it anyway.
I did it anyway. I did it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how was, I mean, like thinking about the Miranda in 2018 in this basement in Sydney, Australia, trying to do these conversations for 20 minutes, being really nervous. And now the Miranda that has just completed 200 episodes,
Mhm.
right? Like, what do you think you will tell your younger version of yourself, like about like all those fears at the beginning and
Mhm.
where you're standing right now?
Yeah. I think I would say, fucking chill, girl. Because I was so stuck in this loop of perfectionism that led to being terrified to do it. I thought I could never say an I thought everything had to be edited perfectly. If there was any background noise in any interview, it could not use it. Just I I always think about, do you ever listen to Garbage in the 90s, the band Garbage?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so always think about this interview with Shirley Manson, the lead singer, where she talks about the early days of Garbage, and she says she's Scottish, and she was like, "My sphincter was so tight." Like that's like I just her Shirley saying that pops into my head when I think about the early days of the podcast. I just
Hmm.
was trying to control every single element of it. And I thought that no one would listen to it unless it fit my ideal of perfection. And it caused a lot of undue stress. And I think, ironically, in the end, not as good of a product because I wasn't relaxed. I wasn't really being myself.
Hmm.
I couldn't even use sort of a normal voice because I don't know what I'm doing talking into a microphone. And I'm sure Tim and I even had arguments about it where he would do the editing and I'd be like, it's not perfect enough. And so apologies, Tim. So I think that I would just say, and this goes true, I think, for any creative undertaking, that you don't know what it's going to be. So don't come to it with this idea of perfection. Come to it intentionally, but be open to let it unfold. And that includes messiness and mistakes and all kinds of things that
Hmm.
make it more real and make it more genuine. Like a recent episode I released with Chema Scandal, right when he said hello, he dropped something and we both sort of started laughing because he was in the middle of moving and it was just he was already kind of in this chaos. And I think originally I would have been like, oh, we have to start over. It needs to be perfect. But instead I left it in and it's the most charming beginning to any episode because it's so real and it's so human. And you can hear both of us just laughing at the chaos of trying to do anything in this world.
Hmm.
And I think coming to understand that it's the cracks are where the light gets in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I feel I mean, do you feel the same that I feel the more that I do it, the less that I edit?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll listen through the podcast and I'll edit something if it really is I have to go pee or the doorbell rings or these really things that would sort of interrupt the flow. But for the most part, I would rather have my own trying to figure something out in real time be there on the tape than have it seem artificial.
For sure. Yeah, I
Mhm.
totally agree with you. So in this, I mean, because it's amazing, right? Like to think how we create all these barriers to do the things that we want to do
Mhm.
because we have these expectations personally, but also we project those insecurities into others. Like, oh, they're not going to listen to this because this is not perfect, and creates all that extra stress. But in all that journey that you have so far, can you tell us a little bit about, or maybe one particular conversation that you had that somehow made you believe that this is amazing? What I'm doing is
Mm.
somehow, this is exactly what I was expecting, or it goes beyond my expectations, and I'm kind of like really seeing the how impactful this product is.
Yeah, I mean there's been a lot in 200 episodes. There's been a lot and a few come to mind. Honestly, the first episode, and not because of any of my tight sphincter perfectionism, but because I was lucky enough to interview Woon Jin Ho, who's just one of the most incredible humans. And she was really generous. And the way she told her story, which was so open and intelligent and meaningful, of her work and her experience with her father going for a jog one day and truly just tripping and breaking his neck and becoming paralyzed from the neck down. And how this affected her and the way she made her work, and how she created these images that she could bring to him in the long-term care facility that he was in to have something to talk about that transcended the circumstances that he was in, because prior to that, he had been a bodybuilder. He had been someone who was hugely active. And not that one paralysis is more tragic than another in any way, but more sort of he was really changed the way he lived really dramatically. And that way that her life intersected with her art and her art intersected with her life was incredible to hear. And she was, again, just so open and honest and wonderful about sharing it. I think that that made me believe that what I was doing could have a lot of substance to it. And it was going to transcend. So what's your favorite Buren? Like,
Yeah, of course.
which can be fun conversations too. But so there is that one. And then I think maybe in a similar vein, a bit later on, Lisette Chavez, and how she trusted me in the very early days of grief after suddenly losing her husband, and how her work had always had an element of examining death, of death's presence in our life, of how we process it, how we process our own inevitable mortality, and how she felt like that work had kind of been preparing her in a way for this sudden loss of her life partner at the time. And so I think in terms of ones that really stick out in the context of your question, I think it's ones where we're talking about printmaking, we're talking about making, we're talking about art, but in a way it transcends into how do we grapple with the impossibility of being a human that feels things and loves people. And that's what I've never understood. But so when I say, like, I feel like I'm an alien, I think it comes back to that, is I've just as a little kid, when I learned about war and the Holocaust and that everyone's going to die and that corporations are people in the United States, I just was like, surely not. Like, surely that's not how this actually works, because how could we ever live? How could we ever go on with these ideas? And so I've been really fortunate in that every conversation I've had, I've found meaning and insight, and people have been so wonderful. But some of the ones that really get into my personal problem of not knowing how to be a person, those are the ones that I think return to when you ask a question like that.
Hmm. Well, that's so beautiful, though. And it also speaks of the capacity that you have to make the human connection with the guests. So they feel so comfortable with you that they can be vulnerable and they can express these experiences that
Mm.
somehow later on communicate or influence their work.
Mm.
I feel that that's one of my favorite things of the podcast too. Like, we can talk about technique, we can talk about secrets of the craft, but there is always this human connection towards how we translate our own experiences and our struggles into the material world, and then we expose ourselves into putting that piece in front of others to create that dialogue. I also love like how many times you get to know the kind of like the mental toughness and the sense of resilience that all these individuals have within
Mm.
their restrictions or within their realities.
Mhm.
They always find a way to like keep pushing and create. So yeah, so I feel that those are
Yeah.
beautiful things that you have shared for
Yeah.
sure.
What about you? Do you have particular episodes for you that were sort of formative in what you you wanted your side of the podcast to be?
Yeah, I mean, definitely speaking to Masad, who is someone
Mm.
who I admire so much, and I feel that the podcasts have allowed me to create a bridge between myself and the people who I look up, the people who is doing the things that I wish I could do, the people who
Mm.
inspire my work. So it's always great to hear a little bit more the stories beyond the iconography that they make, the struggles that they make, like how some of them deal with drug addiction, with addiction in general, right? Like with mental health, depression, loss of someone. And then somehow art has been able to communicate or reinforce that idea of loving life and continue pushing forward. And not only just in the making, but also how they create human connections with other in order to develop these communities that
Mhm.
support themselves so they can be proactive members of their space, create these changes in others, and also fit themselves into growing.
Mm.
I found that so beautiful. I feel that every time that I have a conversation, somehow I just get that reinforcement of there is something more beyond just making the work, selling the work, and just getting the recognition. It's about that connection, that love between people, and that sense of like sharing and being not just being vulnerable, but also being someone who is open to share, to give, because the more
Mhm.
that you give, the more that you receive. So
Yeah.
those have been those are. I mean, I cannot point out like specific ones, but I just feel that every time that I have a conversation,
It,
that gets
it
back to me.
reminds me of a very famous Gabor Mate quote he wrote in The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which was one of the first, or at least in my understanding of this literature, one of the first and really influential ideas to look at books that looked at addiction as a social problem. And he wrote, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. And so to speak to the people that you've interviewed who've done that, I mean, it sounds like that, how you can go from that sort of particular hell on earth to connection, to community, to being of service to fellow humans through art. That's that's the good shit right there.
Yeah. So in that, just following up with this, what do you think the podcast means to you
Mm,
now that you have so many different experiences?
yeah, that's a good question. I think it's I mean it is a job.
That you don't get
Yeah.
paid that much for, huh?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the worst paying job I've ever had. No, so and I think what I mean by that is I do, despite the fact I think of relaxing a bit around the product and relaxing into letting it manifest in what it needs to be, I do take it really seriously as a professional undertaking, and that having the podcasts come out Tuesday morning, that's when, just like that's when it comes out, and following up with that and having my intro and outro be professional sounding, understandable, have the levels be consistent, all of that kind of stuff I do really take seriously, and through a professional lens. And I think about, as my aforementioned obsession with This American Life, a interview with Ira Glass where he said, my job is to make good tape. That's my only job. And it was answered in response to someone saying how, Ira, we hear you on one side of the mic so often doing these interviews. We don't actually get to know about you. So when we do get these little slices of your life, it's so intriguing. Do you think about how and when you release that information? And he just said, my job is to make good tape. So he will do it in the service of making good tape. And that's really a lodestar for me in it as well, is that I am here to make good tape. It's not tape anymore, but it's tape. So I think that that's part of it, is that a very professional side of things. And then also on a more emotional side of things, it it means to me the depths of generosity that exists in our community, that 200 people and then some, and then 80 plus people in your episodes have said, I will give you my most precious, unrenewable resource, which is my time. And I will sit down with you and I will tell you my story and I will be open with you. It's astounding to me. It really is. It's something you can look at, I think, on those gray days and be sort of in awe of that there's this insane wealth of wonderful people in printmaking. We're almost at 300 episodes combined. And I feel like I'm not running out of people to talk to. So it's that is means to me in an emotional sense a great deal that anyone wants to show up to my party.
Exactly. And they're happy to be part of it.
Mhm.
Do you get people excited, sending you exciting messages every time that you reach out to them? Like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome.
Sometimes, yeah,
Yeah.
sometimes people say, "Oh my gosh, I've been a listener for so long and this is so nerve-wracking but wonderful to get your message." And sometimes people just don't reply.
Yeah. Yeah, we get those too, right?
Just
They
gonna get
say, oh yeah, really interested, and then they don't show up.
Yep. Yeah, so it's a it's the whole spectrum, but it
Mm.
really is always an honor when somebody says that they've listened and
Hmm.
or they say at a conference, "Oh, I drove out here and I listened to your podcast for 8 hours on the way over."
Wow.
And I'm always like, "Ooh, that's a lot of me. You just heard a lot of me. I am sorry."
Hey, but it was good tape,
Yeah,
you
it was
know?
about the good tape. It was about the good tape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, do you feel that somehow your life has changed? I mean, the way the people see you?
Yeah, I've been in a weird place sometimes of realizing that I'm talking to someone who has heard me talk for hours that I've never met before. And that's again not to reference something else to explain my emotional state, but there's a have you seen the meme that's Neo waking up in the goop
Yeah.
and it'll say, "No, like put me back. I just paid off my student loans," or something like that. Well, there was one that said, "No, put me back. I was a niche internet celebrity." And so it's a wonderful and curious thing to realize that you're making something that means a lot to people, but that also is a relatively small group of people. Printmaking is always going to be a little bit niche. I'm not running a podcast about a ketogenic diet. Like the spread,
Hmm.
like the reach is always going to be niche, and I love that. I mean, while I would love everyone to love printmaking, I guess what I mean is I don't feel the need to have millions and millions and millions of downloads, but it's it's something I'm kind of getting used to by realizing that it's an odd social moment when you meet someone who already knows a lot about you, because a lot of what you say when you meet someone is the knowing about you. So what do you do? Because you can't say, "Oh, I'm Miranda. I live in Santa Fe. I'm a podcaster. My business is printmaking." This is not that is already known. And
Hmm.
so I think that that's definitely changed where I have to sort out what that looks like. And the answer to that is asking them about their selves because
Hmm.
that's A, is something I'm genuinely interested in, but B, in a way, almost the only way the conversation can go sometimes. So I think that is there. And I think another way it's changed my life, which I have really encouraged students to look after and try and figure out for themselves, is that I have something that is entirely mine. I can switch jobs, I can switch continents, and it continues to be something that I create in the world that I don't have to answer to anyone for. And that is precious. and unusual. And so when I've given talks to students, I'll often encourage them to find something like that. And sometimes that's their art practice. Sometimes that is what an art practice is. But as long as you have anything that is not reliant on anyone else, that's a really affirming and wonderful thing to have in your life.
Oh, that's beautiful. So inspired right now. Seriously. But you're talking about like all these different positives, right? Like of the whole process. I mean, the human touch, the emotion, how much you have grown as a pre-influencer in the community, right?
Yeah.
But what about the struggles? Like what have
Mm.
been some of the major struggles or challenges that you had through this journey?
Yeah. I think that I kind of in tandem with perfectionism, there's definitely workaholism. They tend to go hand in hand, and they tend to be personality defects that the world rewards and that you get affirmation for, but your personal relationships suffer for them. And so there were times when I was working 4 jobs, essentially, if you counted the podcast. And I was so focused on doing so well at each one, including the podcast, that I think it really negatively impacted my friendships and my marriage. And letting people in your life, the humans in your life, know that they are actually more important to you than your work is incredibly important, and not something that I was really good at doing. And I think the podcast didn't cause that, but it brought out an inherent defect in my character, which is to do that. And so I didn't, I used to think that maybe on my deathbed, I would look up and be like, I wish I worked more, you know? But I don't think that that's true. And I think that what you do hear from people who have spent time in spaces of people who are in the end of their life or getting towards the end of their life, the number one thing that people come back to is how well did I love and how well was I loved? And that's what they make meaning for their weird time in these flesh sacks we all have to wear. And so I think having a job, which was this podcast, that there were no set hours and there was no point at which your work was done. You can always research more on someone. You can always edit it more. You can always research more guests. There's no end point. I think that negatively affected personal relationships. Not so much anymore, luckily, because I've become aware of these things. But yeah, I think those were some of the hard moments, was when it was seeping into my personal life in negative ways that I didn't even really realize it. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with you. And sometimes it makes me wonder, is the sense of trying to do more is to satisfy yourself or satisfy other, or is this idea too of that you have this sense of what success is,
Mm.
and you always feel that you can always squeeze a little bit more water of that towel,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So do you feel that your sense of success has changed, or what that means to you in the last 3 or 4
Yeah.
years?
I think what's interesting is that I don't think I ever thought about it in terms of success. And it may sort of be actually synonyms here. I think I thought about it in terms of safety.
Okay.
It was just, I was always saying, I'm not safe enough yet. Like, I haven't truly established myself yet. I'm not, maybe it is success. It's just another word for it. Because I was going to say something about that. Nobody thinks I'm any good yet. But I think I associate that safety with success and sort of vice versa. And that somehow there's this sense of I am okay and I'm going to continue to be okay, whether it's financially or professionally or whatever it is sort of unclear. But yeah, it's just this like I gotta be safe. I have to go be safe. I'm like a little bunny. I'm eating, but like every time I put my head down, I can get eaten by a hawk. I don't know. It's like,
What it will be the hawk in this case?
oh, that's like something my therapist would ask. Good
Oh,
job,
I'm sorry about
Ronaldo.
that.
No, it's good. It's really
It's what's
good.
for free, though.
It's good tape. But I could just imagine my dear therapist Louis being like, let's just stay with that. What is that? He always has those things. So I think the hawk is being rejected by the entire world. If I'm honest, I think the hawk is everybody waking up one day and being like, oh, Miranda's actually an untalented piece of shit. And we didn't realize it. Now no one has to love her.
Wow, that's that's crazy though. Yes.
But that's it. I mean, that's the worry, I think, and I think it's a really deep worry that most humans have on some level, unless they're sociopaths, is that I will not be loved and I won't love well. And that expands beyond our little inner tribe, but to the world when you've got a platform that anyone in the world can listen to with internet connection. I
Yeah.
actually I actually heard, let's see if I can tell this story in a more anonymous way that no one will know who the players are, but at one point somebody told me about something that someone else had said about me on the podcast, that it was like they got a negative impression of who I was because of the podcast. And I just was like, you have to tell me who this third party is because I need to find them and make them love me. Like it was like, I was like, I couldn't let it go.
Wow.
They didn't want to tell me, right? But I was like, no. It doesn't matter that we have nearly 750,000 downloads of people who have come back and chose to listen to what we make. There's one person who thinks I sound stuck up. I need to find them and I will make them love me.
Wow.
I mean, I was mostly kidding. I was
Yeah.
0.75% kidding.
No, but I think I understand exactly what you mean though. It's kind of
Mhm.
like in a classroom, right? You have 20, 30 students, 29 of them are amazing, and then there is this one kid
Mhm.
that you cannot get it. And it's like you focus all your energy
Yeah.
on that particular one. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
make you love you. You need to love this thing. Like, what's going
Yeah.
on? Because it's kind of like reflecting of what is wrong, what am I doing wrong to not make you see what other people is saying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad plays the saxophone and has always had a love for jazz music and jazz musicians. And I remember he told me a story once, and I'm not going to remember which jazz great it was, but there was some jazz great who playing in these small clubs in sort of mid-century 1950s jazz. And if he saw one person in the room who wasn't engaged, who wasn't energetically there, he would just focus in on them and like, that's the one. Like, that's the person I need to get off, right? And the whole set would become like, I'm going to play something so hot that this person has to join the crowd. And so I think there's something about it. So it's students or audience or whatever it is where that person can become the fly in the ointment, right?
Hmm.
Of
Yeah.
your creative process. Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah. So in this case, I mean, now that we have the opportunity to talk a little bit about the past, about what is happening right now, what about the future, Miranda? What's going to happen with Hello Print Friend? What do you
Yeah.
have in mind? What would you like to do?
So I am about to leave Santa Fe, as I mentioned. And so I'm going to be moving to Alfred, New York, which is not close to a lot of things. It's 2 hours from Buffalo, an hour from Rochester, but I'm going to be working at Alfred University there in,
Woo!
yeah, woo woo, as a staff, not faculty, but I'll be running essentially a residency program there that they have. It's called the Institute for Electronic Arts, and it does lots of things within the school. But one of the things is it brings artists in throughout the course of the year to come for a week or two and use the incredible equipment and facilities that are available through Alfred. And I had a lot of people ask me when I announced it on my personal socials, you're going to keep doing the podcast. And first and foremost, yes, absolutely. And I think that the podcast as a practice was part of the appeal in hiring me in this position, because as the name suggests, it's an institute that has really amazing printmaking facilities and really amazing electronic and expanded media facilities. And people come in and they can weave in and out of both. You can use the different equipment in different ways, digital printing and laser cut and all this sort of thing, and then including all the very fancy expanded media software and hardware. And so I think the podcast, in a way, fits into that model, and that I'm talking to people who are using printmaking, but I'm using digital technologies to capture their stories. So I'm excited for how the exposure to that environment will inform how I do the podcast. I'm excited for the potential for interviewing really big name people coming through. I mean, they've had Ann Hamilton and Kiki Smith come through that residency. So one of the things that I really appreciate about what we do is that we have people who are just starting out, maybe just finished their undergrad, and they're doing really great things, and they get to come on the podcast. And then we have Swoon sometimes on the podcast. So I think that that's something I'd want to continue. I would never want it to turn into a famous is only, but I do think that a lot of times people who have lived the creative life that long and that intensely do have wonderful things to bring. So I'd love to see the ways in which that intersects, and how it just inspires and changes me, because everything we do becomes the water we swim in, and we don't really know how it will do that.
Mm-hmm.
I would love, and this is something that I'm really hoping will happen with the brain power I get freed up, because right now I am working 4 jobs.
Jeez.
And this job and the podcast will be the only things. I'd love to expand more on the video work that you've been doing, and collaborate on something like that, because it's such a fun and dynamic form of storytelling that I've experimented with a little bit. I've done some live walkthroughs at the IFPDA or at Print Austin, and I think that is the next natural step for what we're doing as well. And again, keeping the podcast, because as we spoke to, it has incredible
Mm-hmm.
qualities that you don't get in video, but just exploring a new format, a new way to tell stories, I think would be great. And I'd love to collaborate more in what we do, because I respect you and what you do so much. And I feel like
Thank you.
sometimes we're like 2 racehorses running side by side, but not even in a competitive way though, but like 2 racehorses in a chariot. And the chariot, no, this is a bad metaphor. Okay. We're we're 2 fish swimming. I don't know. But like we both we work side by side and we communicate, but like I'd love to see what happens more when we join forces, because I think we've been doing something so similar, and we can Captain Planet. That's the metaphor I want. Our powers combined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the power of the rain. And also, we need to should give a shout out to Elizabeth too, which is another
Yeah.
member of the team, right?
Yeah. Our
Mhm.
wonderful accessibility coordinator, Elizabeth, who creates the transcripts, which is just huge for accessibility in terms of print friends who are deaf or partially deaf. Incredible for research, for all of it, for expanding the archive. And I think maybe, yeah, to circle back, I thought of one more thing that I would love for the future of the podcast, which is I think that we need to find a home for it. We need to find an institutional home for it. And we need to find a university or a museum who will keep the archive and do that digital work of letting it be broadly accessible to researchers and shepherding it through technological changes after we're dead.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. So it just goes into this database that people can just go into and use it for research purposes.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like, are we gonna keep paying SoundCloud $200 a year to store everything until we're 70? Probably not. SoundCloud is already out of date. It was like the only option when I started the podcast 5 years ago. And like now there's so many better ones, but I don't know how to transfer it without like losing a bunch of stuff. So it's already looking a little clunky as an archive. And we do back things up on Google Drives and external hard drives and that kind of thing. But I think what we've created represents years of work and is a incredible snapshot of printmaking in the early 21st century and printmaking through the pandemic. We
Specifically, yeah.
specifically that hopefully will move into the realm of novelty and won't be so common that we're like, oh, that's not interesting. That's all the time. But yeah, and so I really would love. I think a university setting would be the most appropriate. Looking at you, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and even if it's just the first 300 episodes or something. I mean, it wouldn't like any kind of. I mean, ideally, it would be from the beginning until the end of when we all finally decide it's run its course. But even if it was just a big chunk of it, I think it would go a long way towards preserving what you and I have created and really seeing it as an art historical document that it is.
Yeah. Wow. That would be amazing, though. That would be great. Yeah. And also, I know the team mentioned something about, dreaming about making a printed book, right? That will have the first 100 or 200 interviews on it. That would be beautiful and amazing. So yeah, let's start mentioning those things so they can materialize in the future.
Totally.
Sure.
Yeah. The Hello Print Friend coffee table book.
There you go.
Yeah, we've definitely talked about doing that and wanting to do that. And I think it would do well, honestly, if it just was sort of just a little highlight of each artist. And those sorts of things exist. I have a book here that's literally just called Santa Fe Etchers. That's all it is. Just etchers who live in Santa Fe. That's one medium, one town, So there's an audience for it, and I think would be a market for it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I feel that even when we collaborate under the same umbrella, right? I sometimes wish like we had more time to talk. And I feel that this experience for these hours have been great because I get to know you a little bit more too about all the process and your journey. And the same with Timothy and the same with Elizabeth. We actually met in person like 2 years ago. They're collaborating for like more, which was like one of those things the internet can provide you. And also, I'm just gonna take this opportunity to thank you for the chance to become part of this team. I was listening to the podcast before I got invited to be part of, and it was just such a surprise and joy because the weeks before you reach out to me, I was talking to my wife Ashley. Ben and I started making the Ben Munoz and I started making these interviews on Instagram just during the pandemic because we didn't have anything else to do. And I was just kind of like going for a walk with her, and I was just thinking like, wow, that would be really amazing to do. Like imagine what Miranda does. Like if I could do something like that, would be amazing. And then somehow 2 weeks later, you reach out to me and tell me, do you wanna do this thing?
Oh my gosh, I
So
didn't know that. That's amazing.
yeah, so it was really great, and I appreciate the opportunity, and also the chance to try things, right? Like to try the video stuff, potentially do more collaborations. I
Yeah.
just see this continue to grow, and it's really exciting because there is
Yeah.
so many other stories to tell. Just
Mm,
as you say. So thank you for that.
absolutely. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, honestly, thank you so much for accepting and bringing like everything you do to the podcast. It even though, as you said, we don't get to even talk that much because we're insanely busy and have lives and that sort of thing. I always feel less alone just knowing that you're somewhere in the same trials and tribulations that I am
Yeah.
in the
Uh,
process. So yeah, thank you for everything you've brought. And yeah, it was no question. I talked to you once and I was like, oh, if he wants to, he needs to do this full time, you know? I just could tell that yeah, you've got such a wonderful energy and positivity and natural ease that is unusual in a person. So, thank you for being you and thank you for doing this podcast with me.
no problem. It's my pleasure, and I hope that more people get a chance to learn Spanish or practice Spanish with the Hello Prime Friend version that we do on the other part.
I get
Uh,
messages saying that people that they do, or they like
mm,
they grew up in maybe a bilingual Spanish English household, and so they know a lot of Spanish but no art Spanish, and so they
mm,
they have enough to really dive in, and then they get to learn how to dialogue about creative practice in Spanish when before they that just wasn't a part of what was the Spanish they grew up with. I mean, I think it's yeah.
mm.
I hear all the time people use it to practice, a compliment to their Duolingo, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree with you because it's been great for me. All my training, I got it in English.
Right.
So it's been amazing to be able to understand or get to know the translation to all these
Mhm.
different techniques and tools and materials. And they
Yeah.
change depending on the country too.
I was
So
gonna
that's
ask.
also
Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, especially in Chile and in Mexico, they call different things differently.
Mhm.
So it's always beautiful. So it's being a trade. So let's see. We have the 1 hour mark.
We do, we
Yeah.
do. Yeah. How shall we wrap up episode 200?
What is what you say, Shannon of believers?
Yeah, yeah, that was like there's a very early slogan of the podcast, and maybe a good way to wrap up would be to talk about it because it actually had a sort of philosophical underpinning of my beginning this, which was I'd been in the print world for a long time at that point, and I'd worked historically and contemporarily and galleries and in museums and one of the things that was a theme is no matter where I worked or who I worked with, not everybody, but it would come up this idea of well, nobody understands printmaking and we're not let into the important rooms and we're not appreciated as we should be and I just got this sense of like why are we asking for anyone else's approval? Why are we wanting to be in these clubs that don't give a fig for us? Like, don't you realize how great everyone is who's here? Like, we don't need them. And so that's I think where Shun the Non-Believers came from was this idea of we already have everything we need right here. We already have the best people I've ever met and let's just get those stories out there.
I love it.
Perfect. We did good.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, so follow Miranda, Hello Print Friend,
Oh,
on
yeah.
Instagram for the amazing print influencer that she is. And also check out the videos that we have been putting together on the YouTube channel for Hello
Mhm.
Print Friend too.
And you
And
can
if you, yeah,
also see those on the website at helloprintfriend.com. They're just right there under the video tab. And follow Ronaldo at RGZ Prince. Is that your handle? Yep.
yeah,
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. I tag you at least once a week. You think I know it by now. But yeah, RGZ Prince and maybe, yeah, it would be good to just thank everyone who ever listened to this or shared this or sent us a nice note, because I mean, I'd like to think I'd keep doing it if nobody was listening. Probably wouldn't, though.
yeah.
It'd be a lot harder. It would be a lot harder to keep shouting into the void. So,
Hmm.
yeah, thanks for all the guests and everyone who listens, because that's really what makes it what it is, I think. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, no, and thank you for those of you who get a little bit afraid when we reach out to you. You think that we're scamming you and you don't reply anymore. But we hope that eventually you come around and tell us your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. To all those people out there who just ghosted me, I'm still here. No hard feelings.
Well,
That's
that sounds,
professionally, not romantically. I've got all the hard feelings romantically still.
yeah, right. It's just so funny, like that sense of resilience too, like for rejection that you do as an artist, but also that happens in the podcast.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, thank you. Well, what you say for those beautiful messages, people who decide to listen to us when they are alone in their studios working.
Mhm.
So, appreciate that a lot. Much love to you guys. Gracias
Yeah.
totales.
Yeah. Thank
All
you.
right. Well, thank you all.
If you liked today's episode, we have a Patreon where you can help us keep the lights on and get bonus content. Like Shop Talk Shorts, where our editor, Timothy Pauschak, digs deep on materials, processes, and techniques with past guests. Also, if monetary support isn't in the cards right now, you can leave a review for us on your podcast listening app of choice, or buy something from one of our sponsors and tell them Hello Print Friend sent you. But as always, the very, very best thing you can do to support this podcast is by listening and sharing with your fellow print friends around the world. And that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Mike Schultz. Mike is an artist and printmaker currently getting his MFA at Alfred University. We talk about his early passion for art and how this fell off as addiction began to take over more and more of his life. Getting sober and going through the journey to reconnect with making, teaching art on the Thai-Burmese border, and what brings him back to art school now, years after his BFA. You won't want to miss it. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.